The average factory worker in 1850 was dead by 40. Not from accident, though accidents were constant. Not from violence, though violence surrounded them. Simply from living a life that consumed bodies faster than bodies could heal. Victorian England manufactured goods that conquered global markets, and people tough enough to produce them. Childhood ended at 5 when small fingers proved useful. Adolescence never existed. You worked, you suffered, you endured, or you died. Modern wellness culture would shatter against their daily reality like glass on cobblestones. We romanticize their architecture and literature. We forget they were forged in conditions we would call inhuman. They called it Tuesday. The world they entered was already dying. Industrial cities like Manchester, Leeds, and Birmingham had transformed from market towns into sprawling monuments to production and human misery. Factory chimneys pierced skylines in their hundreds, belching smoke so thick that noon resembled dusk. The sun became a rumor. Soot coated everything, turning buildings black, filling lungs with each breath, settling into skin until it became permanent. Rivers ran colors no natural water should ever display. The Irwell, the Aire, the Tame, these waterways served as open sewers and industrial dumping grounds at the same time. Fish died. People drank the water anyway. They had no alternative. Life expectancy tells the brutal truth that sentimentality obscures. A child born in Manchester during the 1840s could expect to live perhaps 30 years, not because accidents were common, though they were constant, not because violence threatened, though it lurked everywhere, simply because existence itself consumed bodies faster than those bodies could regenerate. The wealthy might reach 60 in their country estates. The working poor were ancient at 40. Class didn't merely determine comfort, it determined how many years you breathed. Death visited families with a regularity we cannot comprehend. 1 in 5 children died before reaching their 5th birthday. Cholera, typhus, scarlet fever, measles, whooping cough. These were not rare misfortunes. They were seasonal certainties. Mothers buried children with a frequency that would destroy modern parents entirely. Yet grief remained a luxury working families could not afford. Funerals cost money. Mourning required time. Neither existed in surplus. You buried your child on Sunday, returned to the factory on Monday, and carried forward because stopping meant starvation for those who remained. Housing conditions created the perfect breeding ground for disease and despair. Working families crowded into spaces that would horrify prison reformers today. Cellar dwellings housed entire families in single underground rooms, damp seeping through walls, light never penetrating, air never circulating. 10 people sharing 2 rooms was comfortable by slum standards. Courts and alleys packed houses so tightly that sunlight could not reach ground level. Sanitation meant a shared privy, serving dozens of families, overflowing constantly, contaminating the wells that provided drinking water. The connection between filth and disease was not understood until mid-century. By then, generations had already died proving the link. The wealthy inhabited the same cities, yet occupied entirely different worlds. Fine townhouses sat mere streets away from the worst slums, separated by invisible barriers more impenetrable than any wall. Factory owners who grew rich from working-class labor rarely witnessed working-class living conditions. When reformers like Edwin Chadwick documented the horrors, comfortable Britain expressed shock. They had not known. They had not wanted to know. The system that generated their prosperity required ignorance about its human costs. Work defined existence from the moment a child could stand reliably. Adult laborers faced conditions we would recognize as torture. 14-hour days were standard. 16 hours during busy periods raised no eyebrows. 6 days weekly, sometimes 7 when demand required. No paid holidays existed. No sick leave softened illness. If you could not work, you did not earn. And if you did not earn, you did not eat. Factory discipline enforced itself through fines and beatings. Arrive late and lose wages. Talk during work and face punishment. The clock ruled absolutely in a world where most workers could not afford watches. Factories offered no protection from machinery designed without human safety in mind. Belts and gears spun exposed. Workers reached around moving parts because stopping production cost money. Fingers vanished regularly. Arms were caught and mangled. Deaths occurred and production continued within hours. Compensation did not exist as a concept. If a machine took your hand, you found work your remaining hand could manage, or you starved. Employers faced no legal consequences for workplace deaths until reforms crept forward decades later. Women worked alongside men in many industries, earning less for identical labor. Domestic service absorbed millions of working-class women into wealthy households, where 18-hour days and complete subservience were minimum expectations. Those who remained in factories faced the same dangers as men with additional vulnerabilities. Pregnant women worked until labor began, sometimes delivering on factory floors, returning to their stations within days. Nobody considered this remarkable. This was simply how the working world functioned. Into this environment, children arrived not as protected innocents, but as economic assets. Small fingers proved useful where adult hands could not reach. Small bodies fit into spaces adult frames could not enter. And small wages meant higher profits for factory owners already accumulating fortunes. The concept of childhood as a protected developmental stage had not yet taken hold. Children were simply small adults with smaller appetites and smaller wage requirements. By 5 or 6, working-class children began contributing to family income, not through choice, through necessity that tolerated no sentiment. Textile mills absorbed children by the thousands, but other industries demanded younger bodies still. The coal mines reached downward into darkness, where only the smallest workers could navigate. Boys as young as 5 worked as trappers, sitting alone in complete blackness for 12 hours, opening and closing ventilation doors when coal carts passed. No light permitted, no company allowed, just a child alone in the dark, listening for approaching wheels, fighting sleep that would mean beatings or worse. The psychological damage of such isolation registered nowhere in official records. These children existed as machinery components, not developing minds requiring stimulation and care. Older boys hauled coal carts through tunnels too narrow for ponies. Harnessed like animals, they crawled on hands and knees through passages, sometimes only 18 inches high. Chains attached to belts around their waists dragged loads that adult bodies would struggle to shift. Spines curved permanently from years spent bent double, lungs filled with coal dust that would kill them decades before natural death should arrive. Girls worked alongside boys in many mines until 1842. When legislation finally prohibited female underground labor, the boys continued. Reform moved slowly when profits were involved. Chimney sweeps employed the smallest children for the most dangerous work. Climbing boys, some as young as 4, scrambled up flues, still warm from recent fires. Soot coated their skin, filled their lungs, caused cancers that killed them young. Masters sent them up chimneys barely 9 inches wide. Children became stuck and suffocated. They fell and broke bones that never set properly. Burns covered their bodies from flues, cleaned too soon after fires died. A child too large for narrow chimneys lost their employment value entirely. Growth itself became the enemy. Street children occupied the lowest rung of an already desperate hierarchy. Orphaned, abandoned, or simply surplus to families who could not feed them, these children survived through ingenuity and crime. Mudlarks scavenged riverbanks for anything sellable, wading through sewage and industrial waste. Crossing sweepers cleared paths through horse manure for pennies from pedestrians. Pickpockets learned their trade young because small hands drew less attention. The workhouse loomed as supposed salvation, but conditions inside often proved worse than streets outside. Workhouses separated families by design. Husbands, wives, and children occupied different wards, and contact was permitted rarely, if at all. The logic insisted that comfort encouraged dependency. so comfort was systematically eliminated, meals provided only the minimum calories, and work demanded maximum exertion. Oakum picking shredded fingers, bone crushing exhausted bodies. Children born in workhouses frequently died there, never knowing life beyond institutional walls. Those who survived emerged into a world that marked them permanently as pauper class, limiting employment and marriage prospects for life. Discipline everywhere relied on physical violence, accepted as natural and necessary. Factory overseers beat workers who slowed production. Teachers caned students who answered incorrectly. Parents thrashed children for infractions, real or imagined. Police officers administered street justice without courts or complaints. Violence cascaded downward through every social structure. Children learned early that power expressed itself through pain. Obedience wasn't requested. It was beaten into bodies until resistance seemed unthinkable. Nobody questioned this system because questioning invited punishment. Disease haunted every street and household regardless of precautions. Cholera struck with terrifying speed, killing within hours of first symptoms. The 1854 Broad Street outbreak in London demonstrated the connection between contaminated water and infection. But understanding came slowly, and implementation was slower still. Typhus spread through the overcrowded housing that working families could not escape. Tuberculosis killed 1 in 4, romanticized as consumption in literature, while destroying real lungs in real tenements. Scarlet fever swept through schools, measles followed. Whooping cough echoed through nurseries. Vaccination existed for smallpox, but suspicion limited uptake. Other diseases simply ran their courses through populations with no defenses. Medical treatment offered limited help and frequent horror. Surgery before reliable anesthesia meant patients were held down while surgeons cut. Speed mattered more than precision because every second brought screaming agony. Amputations were performed in minutes, limbs were discarded, and stumps were cauterized. Infection killed many who survived operations. Antiseptic techniques did not arrive until Lister's work in the 1860s, and adoption spread gradually through resistant medical establishments. Doctors moved between patients without washing their hands, spreading diseases they had pledged to treat. Malnutrition weakened bodies against every other threat. Working families ate what they could afford, which meant adulterated food of minimal nutritional value. Bread contained chalk and alum to increase weight and whiteness. Milk was watered and sometimes poisoned with lead. Tea was bulked with leaves previously used and dried again. Sugar came with sand. Pepper came with floor sweepings. Food regulation barely existed. Merchants adulterating products faced minimal consequences. Children grew stunted from inadequate protein. Rickets bent bones lacking vitamin D. Gin offered escape from misery that no other comfort could provide. Drunk for a penny, dead drunk for 2 pence, proclaimed the infamous signs. Self-medication for lives otherwise unbearable seemed rational when considered honestly. Women drank to endure. Men drank to forget. Children received gin to keep them quiet. Alcoholism destroyed families already teetering on survival's edge, but sobriety offered only clearer perception of hopelessness. Mental health support did not exist. Trauma went unnamed. Despair was weakness. Anxiety was laziness. Those who could not cope faced bedlam or the street. They survived. Against odds that should have crushed them entirely, against conditions designed by indifference and sustained by greed, they survived. And they built. The railways that still carry us emerged from their labor. The institutions that govern us grew from their struggles. The reforms that protect modern workers exist because Victorian workers died demanding them. Every factory act, every sanitation law, every child protection statute represents ground gained through suffering we can barely imagine. They didn't endure passively. They organized, they struck, they petitioned, and slowly, painfully, they bent the arc of history towards something resembling justice. The empire they constructed spanned continents. British goods manufactured in those hellish factories reached every corner of the globe. British engineering achievements still inspire awe. Bridges, tunnels, sewers, and buildings, the physical infrastructure of modernity emerged from Victorian ambition, executed by Victorian hands. We inherit their accomplishments daily without acknowledging the cost. Every time a train arrives on time, every time clean water flows from taps, every time children attend school instead of factories, we benefit from battles fought by people whose names history never recorded. Resilience became their defining characteristic because breaking down was not permitted. They endured because endurance was the only option. They continued because stopping meant death for themselves and their dependents. This created strength that was undeniably real and genuinely impressive. Workers who survived childhood disease, factory accidents, and nutritional deprivation possessed physical and mental toughness that modern wellness programs cannot replicate. They knew hardship intimately, and they had proved themselves against it repeatedly. That knowledge provided confidence. No comfortable upbringing can manufacture, yet hardness came with costs. We are only now beginning to calculate honestly. Emotional suppression was not a choice, but a survival mechanism that became a generational inheritance. Fathers who could not afford grief taught sons that grief was weakness. Mothers who worked through pain taught daughters that pain was merely background noise. Feelings became dangers to be controlled rather than experiences to be processed. Generations learned to bury trauma so deeply it seemed to disappear, though it merely transformed into other damages. Depression often manifested as irritability. Anxiety emerged as rigid control. The stiff upper lip that defined British character was forged in furnaces of unexpressed suffering. Physical toughness masked physical damage that shortened lives and diminished the years that remained. Lungs destroyed by coal dust, factory fibers, and urban pollution failed decades early. Spines twisted by childhood labor never straightened. Injuries improperly treated became chronic disabilities. The bodies that survived a Victorian childhood often paid for that survival across remaining lifetimes. Modern medicine extends lives partly because it treats conditions that Victorian life created and that Victorian medicine could not address. The hierarchies that maintained order also prevented progress until pressure became unbearable. Deference to authority kept workers in conditions that authority had no incentive to improve. Questioning superiors brought punishment, so questions went unasked. Innovation that threatened existing arrangements faced resistance from those who benefited. Change happened despite the system, not because of it. The obedience beaten into children became the compliance that employers exploited and that reformers had to overcome. Violence normalized as discipline echoed through generations. Parents who were beaten learned that beating worked. Teachers who survived the cane administered the cane. The cycle continued because no alternative framework existed and questioning invited consequences. Physical punishment declined only as alternative philosophies emerged and spread. Each generation was slightly less violent than the last, but the trajectory stretched across centuries rather than decades. We call modern children soft, and perhaps, by Victorian standards, they are. They expect comfort as baseline rather than aspiration. They assume safety as default rather than luxury. They process emotions rather than suppress them. They question authority rather than accepting it blindly. If this represents decline, then perhaps decline deserves reconsideration. Children who do not work in mines can attend schools. Children who do not endure beatings can develop without trauma. Children who express feelings can become adults capable of intimacy. The Victorians would not recognize our world, but they would recognize its foundations. They poured those foundations with their labor, their suffering, their shortened lives. We build upon their work while forgetting the workers. Perhaps they were tougher than us, genuinely hardened by conditions that would shatter modern constitutions. Perhaps they simply had no choice, and toughness was survival's only available expression. Perhaps the distinction does not matter. They endured what they had to endure. They built what they could build. They dreamed of futures where their children might suffer less. We are those children's children's children, living in futures Victorian workers could barely imagine. Central heating, clean water, medical care, education, leisure, all the comforts they lacked surround us so completely we forget they were ever absent. Their toughness made our softness possible. Their sacrifice purchased our comfort. Whether we have honored that sacrifice adequately remains an open question. Perhaps we have grown weak. Perhaps we have simply grown human in ways that poverty and brutality prevented. Perhaps both truths coexist uncomfortably, as most important truths do.